I probably know you from the last BODYSTACKED, where I gave a talk on the girl stack. And hopefully you remember some of that, because today's talk is a bit of a sequel or elaboration on that theory. But if you weren't there, I guess I'll give you a bit of context and also a bit of context for what the talk is today. So the girl stack was a model for the girl subject and her environment. And a big part of it was thinking about the girl as something that everyone is. It's a sort of subject that floats free from any particular body, especially any particular biological entity. It draws from a couple of different theories, such as that of Tikhon's theory of a young girl, but also Bogna Konyor's theory of the girl as an inhuman subject, to kind of formulate this idea of girlhood as something that is technologically informed and vectorialized, and something that inhabits the platform. And the more we sort of engage with platform technologies, the more she is sort of laminated onto us as a subject. I won't go into all of that today, obviously, but a big part of, or like a dimension of that theory is this idea of the trap. And last time I talked a lot about the platform being a particular type of behavioral trap, and the girl as this kind of cunning being that is able to navigate it more fluently than any other subject. And she proliferates in spite of her adversaries, her predators, and this sort of design for capture. So taking this idea of the girl as prey, we're gonna go into what has become a bit of a visual poem slash secondary model called prey mode. I will also contextualize it that this is also, or began as an article on Dazed that was a lot more about incel culture and the bad science of predator and prey relations, and how that has been embedded in popular discourse through the internet. Today, I don't really want to talk about incels, so this is going to be more of, like I said, it's going to actually lean hard on a hyper-present narrative based on bad science. So I want you guys to approach this as a kind of metaphorical exploration of animals as symbol and as narrativizing entities, as opposed to anything particularly evolutionary or true about how predators and prey relate to each other. And we can maybe have a conversation about that afterwards. Okay, that's all the preamble. So let's get started. So nobody wants to be a prey animal, right? Docile and vulnerable, her gentleness and lack of bloodthirst is seen in popular culture as an evolutionary disadvantage, especially when up against the hunter, whose understanding of the world has been sharpened by his focus on killing and winning. But today we'll talk through how the fundamental properties of being prey are useful for navigating today's predatory environment of surveillance, instrumentalization, and behavioral capture. So prey mode today is a model, a metaphor, and a visual poem meant to evoke how we might actually navigate these traps and predatory instincts of all kinds, from the technological to the gendered and everything in between. So we know it's hot to be a predator. Much of popular culture finds its narrative engine in the behaviors of predation. So tales of swiftly disposing of one's competition, clawing one's way to the top at any cost, the transformation of beta into alpha wolf of Wall Street. Movies, memes, and media have all made ample use of this arc as almost a propaganda machine for male-coded dominance and capitalist production. So far, so familiar. Not only that, but as theorist Jackie Wang details in her book Carceral Capitalism, but the world that we live in is engineered around something that is quite literally called predatory behavior, meant to surveil, capture, and entrap people in cycles that maintain the states of exploitation and disempowerment, that in turn enable vectoralist profit and keep vulnerable populations vulnerable. In an essay called Maximum Jailbreak that I refer to in the Girl Stack, theorist Benedict Singleton details how successful design and infrastructure have been historically imagined as a hunting trap. So he describes human designers and architects as technicians of instinct and appetite. In other words, people who are able to use their cunning to direct the energy of existing drives towards a particular end or solution. So citing the anthropologist Alfred Gell, or Gell, I don't know, Singleton speaks about how a trap is, in fact, always encoded with not only the mind of its author, but it also constructs a model of its victim. So in the Girl Stack, I talk a lot about how examining what the platform demands of the girl and how it constructs the girl can help us see previously unseen dimensions of ourselves and our behavior, and could present us a way with, in fact, escaping or evading the demands of that trap. So we're going to explore that a little bit more today through our cute animal slides. I kind of want to press harder on this idea that we can think of any design that acts on our environment and society at scale as a particularly successful trap, the platform, the city, or even the planet. So in his essay, Singleton expands on this and writes about cosmism and the idea that planet Earth in its entirety is a trap that we have been conniving to escape. Examining the technologies and systems that both serve and entrap us, as I kind of said about the Girl Stack, can reveal these unexamined dimensions that, and in turn, provide new models for engaging with our reality. So in Prey Mode today, we're going to think a bit more about being both author and victim of the trap in this sense, and perhaps also press harder on this idea of whether escape is really the route we want after all, or whether there's another dimension to that as well. To see yourself as a lamb, a calf, a bunny, or a fawn is to identify with being at the bottom of the food chain. Such an admission of powerlessness is obviously why people are afraid of it. Yet a seemingly powerless or base position also possesses latency and provides leverage for unexpected action or means of evasion. So in my girl theory stuff, I wrote about something that I called tactical passivity. So in other words, adopting a seemingly docile persona or set of behaviors to, again, achieve a specific goal. In the Dazed piece, I talk about the memification of this kind of idea of like doe eyes or siren eyes, but also the kind of financial nihilism of maxing out on almost like trad feminine qualities to seem deceptively helpless in order to kind of attain things like gifts and tokens and stuff. So these are all kind of elements of the secret allure of going prey mode. So by now, many people know that struggling against a trap in a literal sense will usually make things worse. If you think about a big bear trap and your leg caught in it, struggling against a trap like that or a snare will tighten the snare or shred your leg into unusable muscle. So submitting to a pre-existing force or set of mechanisms may be the only way for us to conserve energy in order to achieve or wait and watch for the correct conditions to get out of this trap. Or as Singleton writes, arranging both environment and behavior so that, quote, the weak can prevail over the stronger. So that is kind of the setup of this idea of the trap and how we might theorize it today in the age of the platform and the emerging age of generative AI. But for now, let's talk about what this might do to the subject. So even a grass-fed human is encoded with the ability to be a top carnivore. But vectors and hierarchies developed and intensified by these projects of design have simultaneously made the majority of us prey. So if we are well-versed in the world at the top of the food chain, as I sort of described, our apex predator valorizing culture, we also need to bring our understanding of prey mode outside the predatory up to equal speed. So if a human becomes an apex predator through her ability to use the material and energies of the world to entrap others, how can she also learn to understand her opposite, that is also a model of herself, trapped in a system of her species and collaborators' design? So here we can use the concept of excessive interpretability from the theorist Jack Halberstam, who says that the monstrous or not human is defined by its ability to supersede fixed categories. So in other words, something that we can think of as inhuman. And that's something that Isabel touched on, or actually went in deep on in her talk earlier. So there's a nice relationship there. In terms of if something is excessively interpretable, it by nature overflows its form and its operation. So I want us to think about how this idea or metaphor of the prey animal exists on its own terms, rather than according to the predator's categories and singular focus and the definitions that are codified by what the predator might want to extract and digest from prey. And we can do this without denying the realism and seduction of predatory power. The point of being a person within prey mode is, of course, being author and victim of that relation. So embracing being prey means embracing this overflow, being excessively interpretable, as in having your unique individuality disseminate into a herd, for example, a swarm, or something that is no longer written as something that has agency, while also accepting being at the mercy of being torn open or turned inside out. It means being pragmatic about the dangers and attraction of being the object of desire, but not the thing that possesses the desire, the thing that will be torn open, to understand that someone or something will always want to turn you inside out. So picture being torn limb to limb, gutted, disemboweled, or devoured. But also consider that opening up is a synonym for becoming vulnerable, willfully exposing your soft underbelly or more, not for consumption, but for better recognition. In the book YN, or Your Name, Esther Yi writes of the disconcerting jungle that oozes forth from the eyes, nose, and mouth of the face of her beloved. Shout out to Isabel again. The excessively interpretable qualities of a face. Consider that the surface forms with which we interface with the world, so our face, our body, our subjectivity, are far less legible than what we expect. The excessively interpretable prey animal is best recognized through its use case, of course, that is as an object or site of projection of desire. So the blank face, the bunny ears, the Bambi eyes, the easily consumable or caricatured body become reflective screens for the predator's desire. So the jungle that Yi speaks of is contained beneath an ultra-smooth surface that helps to facilitate consumption on the predator's terms. I should note that Esther Yi's book is about her protagonist's obsession with a K-pop idol. So it's kind of amazing. It's this really intricate postmodern psychological drama that takes place purely through this one woman's hallucination of a relationship with a K-pop idol. So the ultimate projection of desire onto an ultra smooth and engineered subject, so a pop star. So when her consumable traits are accessed by a looming predator, the prey's subjectivity remains submerged, so it doesn't disappear, but it is further disguised by the ultra-smooth surface and tangled in the net of her interiority. Just need to put Do Not Disturb on because I'm too popular. So today I want us to consider contemporary subjectivity and representation and how we might move beyond appetite and consider the generative properties of becoming what the poet and theorist Fred Moten calls an illegible body. So Moten, in his understanding of fugitivity and refusal, coaxes us to understand what it might mean to productively withdraw from representation. And under our current visual regime, aka the platform and its screen and ocular centrism, withdrawing from representation also means withdrawing from predation, not only withdrawing from the potential of being preyed upon, but also the desire to want to be a predator yourself. So Moten's writing speaks very specifically about the history of the Black Atlantic and the trade of humans as literal property, and powerfully considers how such a refusal to appear on the terms of the predator creates a condition that is both fugitive and obscene. So fugitive in the sense of evading capture, and I'll talk about that a bit more later, but obscene specifically here in that representation that exceeds social design, aka the predator's architecture, necessarily breaks boundaries and is improper. So theoretically, this could subvert a fixed power dynamic, and in Moten's writing it certainly does. But in this kind of theorization of prey mode, that is not always the ends that we arrive at. So withdrawing from predators' expectations, but also from the expectation that your ultimate life goal is to supersede the predators that come before you, and become the best predator of them all, what does it mean to actually withdraw your participation from that? So there's this kind of idea of defiguration. I don't know if I need to actually go into that too much today, because I think a lot of our talks today have already looked into this idea of the unrepresentable and the abstract being a condition of how we in fact symbolically engage with the world. But I think that the big thing about this element here is that the traits possessed by prey that are not factored into the design of the trap and are therefore excluded from the predator's assessment of good or bad, attractive or not attractive, alluring or not alluring, are in fact its greatest signs of life. So defiguration or the dissolution beyond legible form can reveal or conceal an interior life, whether it's achieved voluntarily through opening the subject through confession, revelation, and other forms of unstable authoring, or by force as the predator breaks the skin of its prey to reveal a new succulent personality dimension to bite into. Delicious. So making peace with how the odds are stacked against us could be, in theory, totally relaxing. It could be cute and fun to be plush and pretty, relaxed and harmless, munching on sugar cubes and organic carrots, becoming the good animal that doesn't fight its role in a larger system of nature. Kind of theoretically speaking, the good animal is always one that exceeds identity. And if the prey subject doesn't fight its role and attempt to become predator, aka the source of categorization and identity, she could also surrender to the possibility of a wound, a crack in smooth subjectivity, an instability that allows this kind of unrepresentable jungle of the self and being to ooze out, and becoming a site for wild desire. So that brings us, I guess, so far, we've talked about the trap and the subject, the prey subject, whose best chances for evasion lie in her ability to exceed the parameters or what the trap knows about her. So let's think a little bit more now about the tactics of evasion. So the prey's traits that actually help it absorb, process, and navigate its environment. So first, consider how the prey animal intuitively gets its world as an interlocking and interdependent system, one that includes its predators, but also its clique. This is distinct from a predator's point of view, as the poet and theorist, lots of poets and theorists in this, Anne Boyer writes in her essay called When the Lambs Rise Up Against the Birds of Prey, the predator remains blind to the true nature of reality because of its deadly focus. So she kind of flips this theory of the apex predator on its head and says that, and I'll quote her, "The bird of prey knows what it knows only in a system built from desire's instances, maintained in the expectation of desire's satiation. A hawk eye sees with the arrogance of only the particular of what it wants, not the whole of what is." In contrast to the prey subject, that navigating the world requires moving beyond individualism and understanding the world on the basis of what Boyer says, what it wants, and instead thinking about the whole of what the world is. So what is a swarm but a set of entities that communicate with each other to move in concert, not only communicating their own position, but also absorbing and assessing their environment, and in swarm theory, in a technological sense as well, this is about communicating not only your position, but what would be a good position to the rest of the herd. So achieving an advantageous position within a swarm requires both sensing and cooperation without the total reversal or denial of autonomy. So the single subject is always managing a positive relation to others. So prey have to absorb the lay of the land, the motion of the air, the predator's shadow, and the flicker of recognition that runs through their friends, the rest of the herd, so that they can outsmart danger together. Under Boyer's treatment, it's like really communist. Obviously, the whole essay that she has written, when you read it, it doesn't really sound like theory and it doesn't sound contemporary at all. It's this really symbolic animal parable, but it is really about, evading the kind of predatory gaze of capital and crafting relationships that are more communistic or communal together to bring the whole, to ameliorate the position of the whole. But in the words of grass-fed DJ icon Horse Girl, talking prey-to-prey relations, we don't see a reason to compete. So to kind of wrap that up a bit, prey mode is therefore defined by non-competitiveness and total sensing. So the prey animal is not separate from its environment. The distinction between its body and its world are smeared together, as readings of constantly changing conditions enter its sensorium and alter its behavior. The prey animal never sees itself as above the land, but rather as an inextricable part of it, neither extractor nor user nor transcendented figure, but something that is both in and of the world, made of the same substance that it consumes, comprised of the same signals that it senses. In Boyer's words, the lamb, for example, is the scholar of the all. So we're going to get a bit trad here, so bear with me. But I wanted to talk a bit about the concept of unconcealment, which is like capital P philosophy. Not really my forte, but let's get into it. Unconcealment is a concept of a non-objectified way of looking at the world. So resisting, I think a lot of the conversations today have been thinking about and addressing what objectified relations to the world look like. When Arvida was talking about the pressure for an artwork to have a quantifiable impact on perception and how that reflects an artwork's success. What is the non-objectified or non-quantified way of looking at stuff? I think this stuff is pretty accepted now as something that resists what the platform demands of us. But I thought we'd revisit it today with our Bambis to think about how that actually could operate. And again, help us model how we might actually engage with these things in a different way. So I'm going to quote Rilke. Like I said, it's very trad. The difference between the trap-like gaze of the top predator, aka human, versus the gaze of the animal, I'm just going to read a bit of this out now, is, with all its eyes, the natural world looks out into the open. Only our eyes are turned backward and surround plant, animal, child, like traps, as they emerge into their freedom. We know what is really out there only from the animal's gaze, for we take the very young child and force it around so that it sees objects, not the open, which is so deep in animals' faces. I have written extensively about what the open is, and maybe we'll address it a bit today, but this idea of the open as something that is capital O open, something that is the opposition to the instrumentalized, the categorized, and the defined. So the open as being the default way that an animal knows and understands the world. In other words, for you planetary computation heads out there, we can think about this as interoperable instinct. the prey animal's sensing suite is multimodal, interoperable, rather than operationalized for naming, categorization, and ultimately trapping others, it captures the life layer as is, allowing it to surround the eye rather than having the eye surround it. So this has a kind of relationship to surveillance in the way that Rilke was not thinking of when he wrote the Eighth Elegy, but we'll extend it to this use today. And being prey means to accept all contingencies as possible, in other words. So the open, in a very literal sense again, the future becoming an absolute infinity as the prey animal exists in its herd beyond its own individual death and processes the simultaneous possibilities of evasion, surrender, escape, and exploration constantly and in real time in relation to all the stimulus that it receives. This one's so cute. I'm like, what is that mouse doing? So in other words, going prey mode means going as far as accepting those built-in surrender, evasion, exploration mechanisms that require you to sense the world as it is. By all means, be soft, gentle, devourable as a trick or for real, just to see what happens next in the open. Could you sense or experience the world differently as a result of your herbivorous relationship to your peers, enemies, and environment? It might not always play out in the way that's anticipated. And again, that is a key dimension of prey mode, is its inherent ambivalence and dangers. So as with any tactic, nothing, not a power shift or a softer life about prey mode is going to be a given. That's my big disclaimer for this. This is not an emancipatory theory. Because what are the stakes of prey-like instinct? It's not all grazing in a field of flowers. Often being prey means being in high alert and high adrenaline. Openness does not negate fear. So at a recent show, I came across a text by Jenny Holzer, who I'm sure all of you are saturated with, installed alongside a set of leg hold traps. So this curator was obviously also on their prey mode tip. The type of leg hold trap that would shred your leg into meat the more you struggled. But I noticed one of the tiles of her text read specifically, I'm going to read this one out too. It's mostly love that makes you look at fine ankles and then break them. The ankle is where the moving power of the leg tapers to an exquisite stem of bone. Sadly, the foot comes next, anchoring wonderful creatures to the dirt. Deer, wading birds, and the best people have fine ankles. As a fine ankle enjoyer, I agree. It's good to crack their support so they'll fall down in a lovely curl. Then you'll care for them so they will be free from all crassness and struggle. You'll watch the shattered ankles heal, and meanwhile the creatures live in a state of grace and suspended animation. So obviously with most of her texts, you can read what you want into it in these sort of tea leaf shapes of dirt, deer, and wading birds. Today we could possibly see a parable of control where this defined idea of the best people are most beloved by others, so other apex predators when they're hobbled or unthreatening, turned by force into beautiful and agreeable objects, incapable of either bounding away or having flashes of adversarial rage. As we know, evading capture doesn't just require excelling as prey, it means understanding the predator's motives to a certain extent in order to anticipate and stay ahead of its next move. So again, underscoring this idea that we're not denying the power of the predatory here, but instead have to understand the sort of yin-yang relationship between predator and prey. The erotics of fugitivity, the dance between capture and escape, knowing and fleeing, are inescapable. And I'll revisit Fred Moten here, who writes, "Fugitivity is a desire for and a spirit of escape and transgression of the proper and the proposed. It's a desire for the outside, for a playing or being outside, an outlaw edge, proper to the now always already improper voice or instrument." So just because you don't mean any harm doesn't mean you're just taking it from the world. This idea of fugitivity, escape, fleeing, and evasion are not always, of course, passive modes. An important element of prey mode is the same as that of the predator, and that is of cunning, using one's vulnerability to find leverage against the forces that conspire against you, that are objectively, in scale or strength, more powerful than you. But the final state of prey is one that is a bit more uncomfortable to think about, which is the metabolic. So if you choose not to evade the predator and or fly away from capture, the final option is, of course, to offer yourself to get eaten. Simply put, being devoured isn't just a dead end. To be willfully consumed bestows the prey with perhaps what we might think of as the conditions to transform into something new, into energy, into a poison, or into a more than final state that still exceeds the conditions of its consumption. In the Dazed piece, I also touched on a lot of memes I was seeing about people being so into their crushes that they would gladly be eaten whole, stapled to their lungs, melted into their eyeballs, or take up residence in their skin. A grotesque enmeshment, the idea that the deepest intimacy in fact happens at the cellular level, and that the greatest act of devotion is in fact cannibalism. That fundamentally is also a prey relation, and one that is much harder to attach an ethics to. What if the deer doesn't hate the ritual of its death? And what if it desires the alligator that eats it and the act of being eaten itself? After all, love is vor. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks very much, Alex. That was, I was going to say, like, as usual, amazing. So I don't know, that's kind of... does anyone have any questions for Alex? Oh, yeah.
I know you said that this isn't supposed to be like an emancipatory theory, but it kind of reminded me of Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction. And I thought, also because it's like, I'm assuming this is associated with like femininity and Bambi's and like the girl. Do you see it as a way, like, if everyone accelerates it, can it impact like the narrative as we, I don't know, like, you know how like the common narrative is like that there is a man and then he conquers something or like wins over something, and then what if the narrative changes basically? Like everything we see like changes.
Yeah, totally. I love that framing, and I think a lot about the carrier bag. People who aren't familiar, I'm sure you guys are, but I'll explain just in case. This dominant narrative that the first technology was a weapon, Le Guin asserts that the first technology was in fact a bag that allowed us to gather things, which reverses this idea of conquering, right? And dominance as being the thing that gave humans the power that they have over things like the animal kingdom and each other. And I think that is has a big, strong relationship to prey mode. But I think the reason why I said it's not inherently emancipatory is because I think when thinking about, what does this look like in the real world, I think a lot of people just use prey mode, like I said, for like a financial nihilism, for understanding that things like the good life or liberation from certain constraints of like racialization or gender or both at the same time are not going to happen in our lifetimes. So by adopting a kind of like Bambiism and getting people to take care of you by maxing out on your like fragility and stuff, I don't think a lot of people practicing that are necessarily being radical, and they wouldn't want to identify as being radical. They just want to get like, I don't know, Cartier bracelets and trips to Ibiza or something, which is fine. And I think that's why I have this disclaimer here, because I think in academia there is a tendency to ascribe revolutionary emotions to a lot of stuff, but I think that is harmful to truly revolutionary agendas. So I think that there are dimensions to this that can be emancipatory and accelerated and should be taken in a way that helps us exit these gender norms, but I do also have to acknowledge that some of these gender norms and the relationship between predator and prey are quite embedded as well. And if we think about where this touches our reality, we have to also acknowledge that. The first time I gave this talk last week in Singapore, someone asked, why are you focused on predator and prey when we're already in this kind of like post-mushroom era? To which I say, like, this is a particularly seductive narrative that is very embedded in trad relations, like heteronormative relations, financialized relations, succeeding in a capitalist environment without being critical of that environment. The predator and prey discourse is much more dominant than the rhizomatic mushroom stuff. So again, it's this idea that this isn't a catch-all revolutionary theory because it is addressing a realism, I think, as well. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer.
No, but I was going to say, I mean, this is how I interpret it. And in a way, like to go back to the previous talk in September, the notion of sort of like decoys as well as being like both like tactics of sort of survival principally, like within a very hostile conditions. So yeah, and I guess in both cases there's sort of them like moments where of temporary sort of either respite or kind of moments to avoid the sort of absolute sort of dangers of whatever it is, the platform or whatever it would be. But for me it seems like it's much more like forms of survival principally, and sort of maintaining, I mean, I guess in a sort of natural sense, like in the wild, as it were, like it is principally around kind of survival, right? It's not necessarily around emancipation, but it's about sort of like how to maintain life, right? Whatever. So, I have so many like, they're not really like questions, but they're more things. I guess I was like really one of the things I was really interested in was this notion of sort of like when you were talking about kind of the prey or prey mode being kind of like this heightened understanding and awareness of yourself and your environment, and I guess like thinking of Omar's talk at the beginning of today, where he was, I mean, obviously in a very, very different context, but he was talking about like using AI and being like really curious about these things that he's come into contact with. I was just thinking in a way like that a prey is like by necessity sort of like curious about their world, like they need to be, right? Again, because if they're not, then it's puts them in an incredibly kind of vulnerable position where in a certain way the predator is kind of dumb, right? So I was just interested in that sort of like flip of apparent sort of power, I guess, in the sense of like, a prey being this kind of by necessity being sort of having to be kind of curious and like hyper aware of their conditions. I know that's not really a question, but just
a prompt.
Yeah, prompt. And
for this large language model.
Yeah.
No, totally. I think that's what I found most. I've been reading that Anne Boyer essay since every year since 2016, because I think it's so perfect in that regard. In this idea of moving, because her writing is so non-theoretical, it allows us to engage with this idea of openness even in the text itself. Sorry, I don't know if that matters to anyone here. But the idea that the prey animal, in spite of historically in terms of how people understand herd animals as being weaker, more susceptible, more vulnerable, I guess the cultural way of thinking about that is that animal is at a disadvantage. So the way that she flips it on its head and says that the prey animal possesses a more scholarly knowledge of its environment because it has that default acceptance of the world that it's in, whereas the predator, as both real animal and metaphor, is so focused on the kill, aka the moment of success, that it has to functionally be blind to other elements in its environment. That's the whole point of focus, right? If you think about a hawk, for example, even the notion that it's circling in the air above the field means that it has to exclude the data of the field and only understand the movement of its quarry in the noise of the field. Whereas the creature in the field doesn't see the field as noise, it sees it as integral data to how it's navigating the world. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, you
activated.
unlocked something.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come to you in a second. Kath at the back.
Thank you. I would, with what you've said, it's just lots of it was resonating, but I kept thinking about the algorithm being apex predator and me constantly feeling like social media prey. Because you talk about the capitalist nature of it, but I'm keen to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. At the start, I maybe was not so clear about it, but thinking about the trap, and the trap as being something that is like human designed, the platform and its suite of algorithms as the kind of ultimate behavioral trap that we have designed. Not just social media, but I talk about Jackie Wang's book, Carceral Capitalism, and how things like algorithmic governance, how algorithms also not only entrap us in wanting to feel hot and get likes, but also can exclude us from things like credit card, securing rent or health insurance. I mean, it's very American in that sense, but her analysis of it is really sophisticated in that sense that, these traps that we've designed for a certain level of success of a few have locked all of us into this prey relation. So that's where she talks about predatory behavior in like finance, in governance, in things like policing as underlining predatory, in that also turns all of us into prey, even if we might benefit from some of these relationships in the end, which is like, I don't know, class discourse or something. But yeah, so social media definitely does make all of us prey.
But the switch off is the big switch.
Sorry?
If I want to flip it, I can switch off or even just delete maybe. So if I want to stop being prey, or do we not do that? Are we always predator or prey?
I guess in the theories that I've been writing, I presuppose that there's no off switch anymore. And if we think about things like planetary scale computing,
Can talk now. I don't please don't talk about that.
sorry. Censored. Or social media itself as a concept, as something that is, social media is no longer emergent. It's embedded in how all of us, even if you're refuting and refusing social media, it's still shaping things like everything from your beauty standards to how you might resist or like not be in the world, to like the spaces that you're in and how they might be designed already before you even enter them. So there, in my understanding, there is no off button anymore. So things like prey mode or girl theory are ways of, they're like survival tactics that kind of have to be realistic about the fact that there's no real escape at the moment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and then, Tibet, this one here and then you. Okay, is that right?
Yeah, you talk a lot about prey and apex predators in particular, but I guess in the ecosystem there's probably the majority, like 8% or 9%, of people that sit in between, who are prey in some situations and predator in others, and not necessarily like sometimes prey, sometimes predator, but always a mix of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Does your theory or like related theories kind of account for that, or speak to anything in that domain?
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to clarify, in that like the series meant to kind of like make these things obvious because we need to actually acknowledge that they're all like swirling in us, that it's very rare that you achieve true apexness, or as a human that you're ever truly, especially like bourgeois educated human, that you're ever really at the bottom of the pile. So yeah, a lot of what is being discussed today is about, I guess one of the things that I hopefully said out loud, is this idea that we culturally have become fluent in the mythologies of predation and success and apexness. So prey mode is helping us, or like proposes that we bring up our understanding of preyness to the same level. So we understand how both those things might operate in our own relationship to the world.
But it also seemed like there was some mention of using prey mode in a kind of, not predatory way, but in a way to like progress your own agenda. So there's like almost turning prey mode into a thing that you can use as an actual active tool in the world.
Yeah. And I think that links to the first question about how some people might use it in a liberating sense, and how some people are using it for individual gain. To ground that, it's like in hetero relationship stuff like sugar babies, or just kind of small behavioral tics that people have then codified into memes, for example, about how you're not necessarily, you're not living your life like you are actually on the bottom of the food chain, but you're maxing up those traits to get something that you want because you know that maybe in a structural sense you are at a disadvantage. So it's like going with that power dynamic instead of pushing back against it. Like, how do you run with a supposedly disadvantaged power dynamic and still get what you need out of it, basically?
I mean, maybe just off the back, I was just thinking, in the talk you were, I mean, in a way, like the prey exploits a certain sort of desire in the predator, in this kind of like, it allows the predator to kind of demonstrate their power in some way. And sort of, I was just thinking in a way like the prey also potentially like puts the predator in a trap as well. By sort of allowing it to kind of creating a condition in which it can demonstrate and kind of perform its power, and to itself, etc.
And increase its blindness.
Yeah. Okay, there was a question.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just answered it. That I wanted to say, like, is the prey like making a trap? Because what I kind of connected is with a previous speaker when they said they were having a conversation with harmony. It said that humans like programmed us to kill the world, and it's like you find the connection between the prey and the predator. It's like with AI, you're feeding it information, and it's like kind of collecting it to come back at you. And it's like the thing you said that at the end you're meant to die.
Yes.
Is this, you're speaking as like a predator to its prey? Listen, you're just meant to die. Jesus Christ! Stop fighting it, honestly.
No, I see it as a ritual and a circle that even whatever trap you set, like at the end, like you're gonna die.
Yeah. Love is war.
I think isn't it like the kind of Freudian sort of definition of life? Life is just the kind of delay of death. Like it's something like that. Actually, sort of, yeah. You can only really define life through death as a kind of thing. So I don't know if that's whether that's helpful or not. But anyway, Jen, you look like you.
It's more like a response or comment, but you mentioned how prey benefits from latency. I guess that's exactly the delay of death. Apart from latency, I guess during this time of latency, what are some tactics? I guess like decoy would be a tactic. Are there some alternatives to decoys while they're running?
I think the illusion of surrender is really interesting. Talking about how the prey uses an optically powerless position to still attempt to achieve what it needs. Sorry, this is very theoretical, but hopefully you guys can attach it to societal stuff. This idea of an optics of surrender, I think, is very interesting and links to a lot of what we were talking about today in terms of like sex and desire, for example, but can also be, financial or operationalized in that way. So decoy is one thing. So putting something instead of your true self or something that you might want to conceal, you put a decoy out there and that thing is preyed upon. the illusion of surrender is actually like, when Arvida was talking about like creating copies of ourselves. A decoy is not a copy, it's something else. The illusion of surrender is maybe making a copy so close to you that even you get confused about the boundary. But there's like a thread of agency that remains. I think there's like a lot of tactics like that, and this idea of like passivity, wildness, disobedience, fugitivity are all words, obviously, but also can be unpacked as like a suite of like prey tactics that can help one achieve particular ends on a sliding scale of political versus individual gain.
I think just building off that, it would be interesting to read kind of things like vilification in those terms as like a survival instinct
Yeah,
or tactic, yeah.
my favorite tactic of all time, having one brain cell. Then no one asks you to do anything.
True liberation.
Yeah.
What do you say when like this kind of camouflage is like countered, or like when people try to like abrupt it and they like you're not real, or you know what I mean, you're not being yourself, or they can see the character being played out? Like,
Yeah.
how do you feel?
I think that's a really great question, and I think it can extend into so many dimensions. I think a couple of people today mentioned like xenofeminism and that really famous line, if nature is unjust, change nature. I think one response can be like, everything is artifice, and everything is inherently, every representation of yourself or every interaction you have with someone has a certain construction to it. And how thick or thin that construction is something that you're toggling, right? And so that could be one response. The other response is maybe just, I think, like kind of tongue-in-cheek when I have to talk about the girl theory, not this theory, but the girl theory in public, is like being like, oh yeah, of course girls are manipulative, or like, of course they're artificial, or of course these things that some people are inherently skeptical of or afraid of, instead of trying to refute them, kind of, again, having this almost like fatalistic realism about them, because it will enable you to have a deeper conversation on a certain level, or a sense of humor about it, I think is another dimension. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
And okay, so I guess like the final question being what we sort of asked every speaker. Yeah, I mean, thinking about AI and its increasing sort of influence in our lives, our life worlds. How do you see AI, impacting and affecting our bodies, our identities, etc.?
Yeah, I know I should have thought about this because you asked it like 5 times today.
Yeah. You had a day to prepare.
I know. Well. I think one thing is that
maybe if you wanted to refer to prey mode, like how would you see it in relation to prey mode? And
well, I think prey mode is by necessity ambiguous because I want it to scale in that way. So it can be about things like relationships and financial nihilism, or it can be about how we are relating to something. I think someone at the back there was talking about the how we're essentially training an AI to, I guess the Western fear is that like we're training the AI to eventually beat us at our own game, aka mastery and dominance. And that's yesterday. There's a lot of talk about like AI doomerism, and how essentially those fears are kind of fears of the capitalist master of having like the birds, the things come home to roost, or whatever that expression is. I don't know any idioms. So I think one of the implications is obviously that prey mode as a suite of tactics is one that is going to be increasingly relevant or important as the systems that we create and inform and train recursively also learn our behavior. So again, thinking or leaning hard into this idea that the prey has to understand its kind of sensory world as a whole to help us, I guess, surface things about ourselves that are perhaps uncaptured by something that we are subjectively, that are being, I think Alistair yesterday was talking about every set of data being subjective and how training data is a agglomeration of subjective sets. So things will still be invisible to that. So what about those elements can we use in our favor if what AI is doing is intensifying capitalism? What things are invisible to that we can use to resist not AI but capitalism? So that's one thing. And the other thing I think is on the surrender side of things is letting it eat us whole. So I guess the fun part about things like theorizing AI is like, what if it is just the ultimate hot non-human totalizing entity that we will interface with for the rest of time? If we surrender to that, what are the like erotics of it? How does it change? I guess what Kate was talking about earlier and what I was asking her about is like, if we have to live with AI in the way that we now live with the platform, if we live with a synthetic intelligence at that level, I think there's a lot of possibility of how that might change how we desire not only each other, but like the world, which is part of this love is war thing as well. So maybe I'll just leave it there before it gets weird.
Well, thanks very much. I guess like just to, I mean, obviously like it's the conclusion, and I'm not going to make some grand sort of like, conclusion to the whole summit. I mean, I guess over the last 2 days I've just been like collecting a few kind of words, and interestingly, a lot of the things that came up were, so I've got like 4 words that seem to be, you know, in various forms of like recurring over the last 2 days, and so one of them was kind of errors, second one was flaws, disobedience and defiguration. And so I was just like, it just seemed like quite interesting that these kind of 4 words were sort of in the same sort of, I guess, like ecosystem as such. So I don't know what that means as such, but I think as I say, it was interesting that over the course of the last 2 days, then there were most of the talks, or all of the talks in some forms, were talking about or mention these notions of kind of errors, flaws, disobedience, and defiguration in relation to our kind of AI and our relationships to them. So with that, I would say thank you very much for coming today. All the great speakers, the audience, questions, etc. And lastly, thanks to Alex for a brilliant concluding talk. So thank you.